If you pull that trigger, you'll lose the only thing in this world that still makes you human. I watched his hand freeze. The gun was pointed at the man kneeling between us, but Rika's eyes were locked on mine. In them I saw something I never expected to find in a man who'd built an empire on fear and blood. Uncertainty. People talk about karma like it's this mystical force that eventually balances the scales. But standing in that warehouse at 3 a.m, staring down the barrel of choices that could destroy everything, I learned that karma isn't patient. It doesn't wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes it crashes into your life during a Tuesday night shift, when you're too tired to care about anything except getting home to make sure your little brother ate dinner. How are you all doing today? I hope wherever you're watching this from, you're somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Maybe you're curious about how an ordinary waitress from Seattle ended up in the middle of a mafia war, holding the heart of the most dangerous man in Los Angeles in her hands. Trust me, I've asked myself that same question 1,000 times. My name is Emily Carter. This is the story of how I went from an exhausted server who could barely afford rent to the woman who brought a mafia boss to his knees without firing a single shot. The woman who walked into his world by accident and walked out with everything he never knew he needed to give. But let me start from the beginning. 3 months before that warehouse, before the blood and the betrayal and the moment I realized I'd fallen in love with a man who could order someone's death with a whisper, I was just trying to survive. I was 28 years old, working double shifts at Kagami, an upscale Japanese restaurant perched on a rooftop in downtown LA. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than I made in a week. The kind of place where people like me were supposed to be invisible. I believed in working hard and keeping my head down. I believed that if I just pushed through another year, maybe 2, I could save enough to send my brother Danny to college. I believed that good people who did their best would eventually catch a break. I believed in a lot of things back then. The restaurant was beautiful, I'll give it that. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Minimalist design with dark wood and soft amber lighting. I'd been working there for 6 weeks and I still felt out of place. Most of the staff were Japanese, their conversations flowing in a language I understood but pretended not to. It was easier that way. Less complicated. I didn't know then that the restaurant was just a front. That the real business happened in the private rooms upstairs, where men in expensive suits discussed territory and debts and things that would make my blood run cold. I didn't know that every smile, every transaction, every perfectly plated dish was part of a machine that ran on fear. I definitely didn't know that the owner, the man I'd seen exactly twice in my 6 weeks there, was the head of the Tanaka clan, one of the most powerful Yakuza families on the West Coast. His name was Rika Tanaka, and the first time I really saw him, truly saw him, was the night everything changed. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were usually slower, but that night we had a private party in the main dining room. 12 men, all Japanese, all wearing suits that probably cost more than my car. The energy in the room was different. Tense. The other servers moved with extra precision, extra care. Nobody smiled. I was assigned to their section. My manager, Mr. Yoshida, pulled me aside before service. "Be perfect tonight, Emily. No mistakes." The way he said it made my stomach knot, but I nodded. I needed this job. Danny's tuition payment was due in 2 weeks, and I was still $800 short. Everything went fine for the first 4 courses. I kept my head down, my movements efficient. I'd learned the menu in both English and Japanese, practiced the pronunciation until my tongue ached. My mother had taught me the language when I was young, before she died. Before everything fell apart. It was one of the few gifts she'd left me, though I rarely used it. Then came the 5th course. Amadai no wakasayaki. Tilefish grilled wakasa style. Except when I announced it to the table, my exhausted brain mixed up the words. I said Amadai no kawasayaki. A small mistake. A single syllable. The table went quiet. Then I heard his voice for the first time. Smooth, cold, each word precisely cut. He spoke in English, his accent slight but noticeable. "Did you just insult my guests with your incompetence?" I looked up. He sat at the head of the table, and I finally understood why the room felt different tonight. Rika Tanaka wasn't just present. He was the gravity everything else orbited around. His dark hair fell naturally away from his face. His eyes were the color of black coffee, and they looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. He wore a black suit, no tie, the kind of casual perfection that only comes with absolute confidence. I apologize. I started in English, feeling my face flush. I meant to say. You meant to say many things, I'm sure. But competence requires more than meaning, doesn't it? He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Perhaps you should work somewhere more suited to your limitations. The men at the table laughed. Not loud, just enough. Just cruel enough. Something in me cracked. Maybe it was the 14-hour shift. Maybe it was the weight of every condescending man who'd ever treated me like I was disposable. Maybe it was my mother's voice in my head, reminding me that respect is earned by demanding it. I straightened my spine, looked him directly in the eyes, and responded in fluent Japanese. You're absolutely right. I made an error in pronunciation. Wakasa, not kawasa. However, if we're discussing limitations, perhaps we should also address the fact that you just used the wrong honorific for your guest to your right, unless you intended to insult a man who outranks you. Which, given your reputation for precision, seems unlikely. The silence that followed was absolute. I'd spent years listening to my mother's lectures on Japanese business culture, on the subtle hierarchies embedded in every word. I'd corrected him on something his own men probably noticed but would never mention. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Anger. Something else I couldn't name. You speak Japanese, he said slowly, still in Japanese. My mother was a language professor. She lived in Kyoto for 7 years before I was born. I kept my voice steady. She taught me that language is respect. And respect flows both ways. Before you hit that like button, let me tell you I want you to stick around for this story. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about power, about love, and about the thin line between salvation and destruction. So go ahead, like this video, maybe drop a comment telling me if you've ever stood up to someone who terrified you. And let me tell you exactly how I went from that moment of defiance to falling in love with the most dangerous man I'd ever met. Because Rika Tanaka did something then that his men had probably never seen. He laughed. Just once, short and sharp, like the sound surprised even him. Then he dismissed me with a wave of his hand, and I walked back to the kitchen on shaking legs, absolutely certain I'd just lost my job. I had no idea I'd actually just stolen his attention. And in Rika's world, attention was the most dangerous thing you could take. I didn't get fired. That was the first surprise. I finished my shift, went home to our tiny apartment in Koreatown, and spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look. Danny was already asleep when I got in, his textbook spread across the kitchen table like always. 17 years old and carrying a 4.2 GPA while working weekends at a grocery store. He deserved so much better than what I could give him. Our apartment was small. One bedroom that Danny took, while I slept on the pull-out couch. The air conditioning barely worked, and the neighbors upstairs fought every Thursday like clockwork. But it was ours. After our mother died 6 years ago and our father disappeared into a bottle and then into nothing, it was just me and Danny. I was 22 when I became his legal guardian. 22 and completely unprepared. But you don't get to choose when life decides to test you. Mom died of cancer. The fast kind, the cruel kind. One day she was teaching her evening Japanese literature class at the community college, and 6 months later we were picking out caskets we couldn't afford. She'd spent 7 years in Kyoto in her 20s, fell in love with the language, the culture, the poetry. She used to read to me in Japanese before bed, these beautiful, sad poems about cherry blossoms and impermanence. Mono no aware, she'd say. The pathos of things. The bittersweet awareness that everything is temporary. I understood it better after she died. Dad left a year later. Just walked out one morning and never came back. I didn't blame him. Some people aren't built for grief. They crack under it, and all that's left is the need to run. So it was me and Danny in that apartment, and every single day was a calculation. Rent, utilities, food, his school supplies, saving for college. I worked 50, sometimes 60 hours a week across 2 jobs. The restaurant paid better than my morning gig at a coffee shop, but it still wasn't enough. It was never enough. The second surprise came 3 days after the incident. I was in the staff room before my shift, changing into my uniform, when Mr. Yoshida knocked on the door. "Emily, Mr. Tanaka wants to see you." My stomach dropped. Now. I followed him upstairs. I'd never been to the upper floors. Staff wasn't allowed. We took an elevator that required a key card, and the doors opened into a hallway that looked nothing like the restaurant below. Darker. Quieter. The kind of quiet that felt intentional. Mr. Yoshida led me to a door at the end of the hall and knocked twice. "Enter." Rika's voice muffled by the wood. The office was exactly what I expected. Clean lines, dark furniture, windows overlooking the city. Rika sat behind a massive desk, reading something on his laptop. He didn't look up when I entered. "Sit," he said in English. I sat in the chair across from him and waited. My heart was hammering, but I kept my hands still in my lap. My mother used to say that showing fear was like showing your cards in poker. Sometimes the only power you have is pretending you're not terrified. He finished whatever he was reading, closed the laptop, and finally looked at me. In the soft light of the office, his features were sharper. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible. His eyes were unreadable. "Your mother," he said. What was her name? Not what I expected. Catherine Carter. She taught at Kyoto University for 7 years. Japanese literature and linguistics. He nodded slowly. "And she taught you?" "Every day until she died." "How long ago?" 6 years. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but something adjacent. My father believed that language was the soul of culture. That to speak Japanese without understanding its heart was to insult generations. I didn't know where this was going, so I stayed quiet. "You corrected me in front of my men," he continued. "You embarrassed me." "I know. You should have been fired. Possibly worse." My mouth went dry, but I held his gaze. "I know that too. And yet you did it anyway." "You embarrassed me first," I said. I'm not in the habit of letting that go unanswered. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "No, I don't think you are." He stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. From behind he looked almost relaxed, but I was learning to read the tension in his shoulders, the precise control in every movement. "I have a proposition for you," he said, still facing the window. "You'll work directly for me. Private dinners. Meetings that require someone who understands both languages and the nuances between them. The pay is triple what you make now." I blinked. "Why?" "Because competent people are rare. And you're more competent than you pretend to be." He turned to face me. "Also because you're the first person in 5 years who's looked me in the eye without flinching. Plenty of people must look you in the eye. They look at what they think I am. You looked at me like I was just another rude customer." That almost smile again. It was refreshing. I should have said no. Every instinct I had screamed that this man was dangerous, that his world was poison, that getting closer to him was the worst decision I could make. But triple the pay meant I could cover Danny's tuition in 3 months instead of scraping by for another year. "When do I start?" I asked. "Tonight. 8 o'clock. Private dinner with business associates. Wear something nicer than your uniform." I didn't own anything nicer than my uniform, but I nodded anyway. That night, I showed up in the only dress I owned that wasn't falling apart. Black, simple, probably 5 years out of style. Rika looked at me for exactly 2 seconds and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, a woman arrived with 3 dresses in my size. Designer labels I'd only seen in magazines. "Choose one," Rika said. "Consider it a uniform." I wanted to refuse. Pride is funny that way, it makes you want to starve rather than accept help from certain people. But the navy blue dress fit perfectly, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The dinner was in one of the private rooms. 6 men, all Japanese, all watching me like I was a test. Riku was running. I served, I translated when needed, and I kept my expression neutral, even when the conversation turned to things that made my skin crawl. Territory disputes. Detsoed. A man named Hayashi who'd apparently made a mistake that needed correcting. I learned quickly that in Rika's world, mistakes weren't forgiven. They were corrected. And correction usually involved pain. After the guests left, Riku asked me to stay. We sat in that private room, the table cleared except for 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey I probably couldn't pronounce. You did well, he said, pouring 2 fingers into each glass. I just served dinner and translated. You didn't react when Sato described what he wanted to do to Hayashi. Most people would have flinched. He slid 1 glass toward me. That takes either courage or excellent self-control. Or I just really need this job. He studied me over his glass. Your brother, Danny. He's 17. My blood went cold. How do you know about Danny? I know everything about people who work for me. He's a senior at Lincoln High. Honor student. Works weekends at a grocery store on Normandy. You've been his legal guardian since your father left. The fact that he'd looked into me shouldn't have surprised me, but hearing Danny's name in his mouth felt like a threat. He has nothing to do with this. I know. I'm simply illustrating that I pay attention. He took a sip. You're 28, working 2 jobs, saving for his college. You see if his grades hold. That's the plan. Expensive plan. He's worth it. Something in Rika's expression softened, just for a moment. My younger sister was brilliant too. She wanted to study medicine. The past tense hung between us. What happened? I asked quietly. She made the mistake of loving someone I didn't approve of. Someone weak. His jaw tightened. He got her killed trying to prove he wasn't. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 8 years ago. I've already corrected everyone responsible. The casual way he said it made me shiver. Corrected. Like they were math problems, not people. But underneath the cold efficiency I heard something else. Grief. The kind that doesn't heal, it just gets buried under layers of control and violence. We sat in silence for a while. Outside the windows, Los Angeles glittered like broken glass. Why do you really want me here? I asked. You have plenty of people who speak Japanese. Yes. But they're afraid of me. Fear makes people careful, but it also makes them dishonest. They tell me what they think I want to hear. He looked at me directly. You tell me I used the wrong honorific. That was different. I didn't know who you were. And now that you do? I considered lying. Considered playing it safe. But something about the way he looked at me, like he was daring me to be real, made me tell the truth. Now I know you're dangerous. I know people are terrified of you, and probably for good reason. I know this job is going to complicate my life in ways I can't predict. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned. But I also know that you just offered me a way to give my brother the future he deserves. So I'm going to take it, and deal with the complications as they come. Rika smiled then. A real smile, small but genuine. You're either very brave or very stupid. Most days I'm not sure there's a difference. He laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so human that for a second I forgot to be afraid. That was my first mistake. Forgetting that human and safe are not the same thing. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked 6 private dinners for business meetings, and one very tense negotiation between Riku and a man who ran the docks at Long Beach. I learned the vocabulary of violence, territory, tribute, enforcement. I learned to keep my face blank when men discuss breaking bones and burning buildings. I also learned that Riku was more than the cold, controlled Oyabun everyone feared. Late at night, after the meetings ended and his men left, he'd sometimes ask me to stay. We'd talk. About my mother, about her years in Kyoto, about the poetry she loved. About his sister, whose name was Yuki and who died at 19. About the weight of running an empire built on fear. Do you ever wish you could walk away? I asked him one night. We were in his office. 2 a.m. Rain against the windows. Every day, he said quietly. But men like me don't walk away. We die in this life, or we die trying to leave it. That's bleak. That's reality. He looked at me. What about you? Do you ever wish you could walk away from Danny? From the responsibility? Never. He's the only family I have left. Even though he's the reason you work yourself to exhaustion, the reason you can't have your own life. He's not a burden. He's the point. I meant it. Everything else is just details. Rika was quiet for a long moment. My father used to say that loyalty is the only currency that matters. Money, power, fear, they're all temporary. But loyalty, real loyalty, that's worth dying for. Did you believe him? I used to. He turned back to the window. Now I think loyalty is just another word for trap. We're loyal to people who don't deserve it, to traditions that strangle us, to versions of ourselves we've outgrown. There was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable. I had the sudden sense that I was seeing past the armor, past the reputation, to the man underneath. The one who was tired. The one who carried ghosts. I should have kept my distance. Should have remembered that he was my boss, that his world was violence, that getting close to him was dangerous. But I've never been good at should. You're not trapped, I said. You just think you are. There's a difference. He looked at me like I'd said something in a language he'd forgotten he knew. Then his phone rang. He answered in Japanese, and I watched his entire demeanor shift. The vulnerability disappeared behind cold efficiency. When he hung up, his face was unreadable. You need to leave. What's wrong? Nothing that concerns you. Go home, Emily. I stood to leave, but something made me stop at the door. Riku. He looked up. Whatever's happening, be careful. His expression softened just slightly. Careful isn't in my job description. I went home that night with a strange knot in my chest. Worry maybe. Or the first stirrings of something more dangerous. Danny was still awake when I got in, hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table. You're home late, he said without looking up. Work ran long. What are you still doing up? Calculus. Mrs. Patterson assigned this problem set that's basically impossible. I looked over his shoulder at the screen full of equations that might as well have been ancient Greek. You'll figure it out. You always do. He rubbed his eyes. Can I ask you something? Always. This new job, the one that pays better, is it safe? My heart clenched. Danny was smart. Too smart. He'd noticed the nicer clothes, the later hours, the way I came home tense. It's fine, I lied. Just serving private dinners for wealthy clients. Boring stuff. He looked at me, then really looked at me with eyes that were too old for 17. You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? Of course. Another lie. Because how could I tell him that I was working for the Yakuza? That I was starting to care about a man who'd probably killed more people than I could count? That every day I went to work, I was stepping deeper into a world I didn't understand? I'm fine, Danny. Promise. Now go to bed. You have school tomorrow. He hugged me goodnight and I held on maybe a second too long. The next day everything changed. I showed up for my shift at Kagami, but Mr. Yoshida pulled me aside before I could even clock in. There's a problem, he said. His face was pale. With your brother. My entire world tilted. What are you talking about? Mr. Tanaka wants to see you. Now. I practically ran to the elevator. My hands shook as we rode up. Whatever this was, it was bad. I could feel it. Riku was in his office standing by the window. He didn't turn when I entered. Tell me about your brother's friend Jason, he said. Jason Park? They've been friends since middle school. Why? Because Jason owes money to one of my collectors. $15,000. Gambling debts. My stomach dropped. What does that have to do with Danny? Rika finally turned to face me. His expression was carefully neutral, but I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Jason used Danny's name as a reference when he borrowed the money. Told my collector that Danny would vouch for him, that the Carter family was good for it. That's insane. Danny doesn't have $15,000. I don't have $15,000. I know. But my collector doesn't care about what's fair. He cares about what he's owed. Rika's jaw tightened. Jason disappeared 2 days ago, which means the debt transfers to his guarantor. Danny didn't guarantee anything. He's 17 years old. The man who lent the money doesn't care about technicalities. I felt like I was falling. What are you saying? I'm saying that as of this morning, your brother is on a list. And the people who enforce that list don't ask questions. They collect. The room spun. This couldn't be happening. Danny was a kid. An honor student who spent his weekends stocking shelves and studying calculus. He had nothing to do with this world. Please, I heard myself say. Please, Riku. He's just a kid. He didn't do anything wrong. I know. Then fix it. You're the boss, right? Tell them to leave him alone. It's not that simple. If I intervene every time someone claims they're innocent, I lose credibility. My men start questioning whether I'm weak. I don't care about your credibility. My voice broke. I care about my brother. He's all I have. Riku was quiet for a long moment. Something worked in his jaw, some internal calculation I couldn't read. There's a way, he finally said. But you won't like it. I don't care. Tell me. I buy the debt. It becomes mine instead of Kobayashi's. Danny is safe. Relief flooded through me, so intense I almost collapsed. Thank you. God, thank you. I'm not finished. His eyes were dark. The debt still exists. $15,000 plus interest. You'll owe me. The relief curdled. I'll pay you back. It might take a while, but I will. I know you will. But until you do, you belong to me. You work when I say. You go where I say. You do what I say. No questions. I understood what he was offering. Protection for Danny in exchange for my complete obedience. A cage wrapped in kindness. And if I refuse? His expression didn't change. Then Kobayashi's men visit your brother tomorrow. And I can't predict how that conversation will go. It wasn't really a choice. It never had been. Okay, I whispered. I'll do it. Riku nodded slowly. I'll take care of it today. The debt is mine. Danny is safe. I should have felt grateful. He was saving my brother's life. But all I felt was trapped. He'd been right that night when he talked about loyalty. It was just another word for trap. Emily. His voice was softer. I know what you're thinking. But this is the only way. In my world, debts must be paid. This way at least Danny stays safe. While I become your property. Not property. Under my protection. There's a difference. Is there? He didn't answer. I left his office feeling like I just signed something written in blood. In a way I had. When I got home that night, Danny was making dinner. Instant ramen with eggs, his specialty. He was humming something happy, oblivious. I watched him from the doorway and felt something crack inside my chest. He had no idea how close he'd come to being hurt. No idea that his stupid friend had put a target on his back. No idea that I just traded my freedom to keep him safe. And I'd never tell him. Because that's what love is sometimes. Carrying the weight so someone else doesn't have to. Hey Em. He called over his shoulder. Want some? I made extra. I smiled even though I felt like crying. Yeah, that sounds perfect. We ate dinner together like always. He told me about his calculus test, about the girl in his English class who maybe smiled at him, about his college applications. Normal things. Beautiful things. And I listened and nodded and pretended my world hadn't just fundamentally shifted. Because that's the thing about protection. It always comes with a price. And I just learned that Riku Tanaka never did anything without making sure he got something in return. Even kindness was currency in his world. Especially kindness. The first rule of Riku's new arrangement was that I had no agency. The second rule was that I had to act like I did. He didn't make me wear a collar or sign a contract, nothing that dramatic. He didn't need to. He'd simply bought my debt, and in doing so, he'd bought my obedience. It was all internal, all psychological, which was far more terrifying than any physical threat. I was trapped by my love for my brother, and Rika knew exactly how to pull that string. My new life began immediately. The morning coffee shop job was gone. It had been replaced by a 24/7 availability to Riku. My hours were late nights, sometimes all night, spent in the silent, controlled environment of the upper floors of Kagami. I wasn't just a translator anymore. I was a fixture. His shadow. He used me to vet documents written in English, to translate sensitive calls, and to sometimes just sit quietly in his office while he worked. He said my presence was calming. I said I was just doing my job. Neither of us mentioned the $15,000 debt hanging over my head, or the safety of my brother, but it was the silent third person in every room we shared. The irreversible commitment came 1 week into the new arrangement. Rika told me we were traveling to San Diego for a 3-day summit, a gathering of the major Japanese organized crime leaders on the West Coast. What is the summit about? I asked, packing a small suitcase. The nice clothes were now a permanent fixture in my life, paid for, of course, by Riku. Another layer of the debt I couldn't ignore. Balance, he said, standing in his office looking down at the city. When a powerful leader dies or steps down, the territory is renegotiated. The stakes are immense. We are going to ensure my family's territory remains intact. And what is my role? He turned and his gaze was steady. You are my attaché, my conseiller. You are proof that I am modern, that I am disciplined, and that I have resources other leaders don't. You will translate every word, and you will relay every subtext you hear. These men will try to use the language against me, to use subtle phrasing to trap me into agreements. You will be my eyes and my ears. But I don't know the politics, I argued. I don't know the history. You know the language, the culture, and you're not afraid of me, he said simply. That makes you the most valuable person in that room. This was the point of no return. Walking into a room full of Oyabun meant acknowledging that I was fully embedded in his world. It meant if anything went wrong, I wouldn't just be an employee. I'd be a target. The stakes didn't just affect me and Danny anymore. They affected Rika's entire empire. The trip itself was a blur of expensive cars, sterile hotel conference rooms, and conversations that felt like chess games played with lives. I sat beside Riku for 12 hours a day, translating the clipped, formal Japanese used by men who had built their wealth on human suffering. One of the men, a leader named Kojima, was a particular threat. He was older, more traditional, and deeply resentful of Rika's youth and westernized business approach. Kojima spoke in dense, often archaic Japanese, peppered with proverbs intended to confuse and distract. In the middle of a tense discussion about the Long Beach docks, the same docks Riku had negotiated over weeks ago, Kojima made a move. He started speaking about the importance of family lineage and tradition, using words that suggested Riku, who inherited his power through his father, was less legitimate than someone who had climbed the ranks. You seem to forget, young Tanaka, Kojima said, his voice laced with venom, that a fence built on sand will inevitably collapse. Where is your foundation? Your roots? Riku translated this for me, his face impassive. But I heard the subtext. This wasn't about territory. It was a personal attack on his legitimacy and control. I leaned close to Riku, my mouth near his ear, translating in a low whisper that only he could hear. He's not asking about your family. He's questioning your loyalty to the old ways. He's saying you're too American, too soft. Riku nodded, his eyes never leaving Kojima. Then he spoke, and the translation I gave him was perfect. He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, Riku stood and bowed respectfully to the room, then looked Kojima directly in the eye and responded using the same formal, old-world honorifics Kojima had used earlier, but applied with chilling precision. Kojima-san. Tradition is the vessel that carries us forward, but a vessel that refuses to take on new water becomes stagnant and useless. I did not forget my father's foundation. I modernized it. I have brought stability and immense profit to every venture under my control, a stability that benefits everyone at this table. If a fence collapses, it is not because the sand is weak, but because the builders failed to adapt to the shifting terrain. Which failure, I wonder, are you more concerned about? The room went silent. Kojima's face tightened. Riku had matched his traditional language and simultaneously insulted his age and his ability to adapt. He had won the exchange without raising his voice. After the meeting broke, Riku walked out, his composure absolute. He led me back to his suite without saying a word. Once the door was closed, he turned to me. What did you hear that I missed? He used the term gaijin once very quickly when referring to your non-Japanese partners. I told him. Gaijin, foreigner, outsider. And when he spoke about the docks, he specifically mentioned the old code of the river, a very old term. It suggests he thinks you are disrespecting an ancient pact by using modern contracts instead of handshake deals. Riku took off his suit jacket and tossed it onto the sofa. He's testing me. Testing my discipline. Or he's setting you up, I countered, suddenly fearless. He wants you to lose your temper or make a mistake that looks like arrogance. You didn't, but he's not finished. Riku walked over to me, stopping only inches away. I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. His scent, expensive cologne and the faint trace of gunpowder, maybe, filled the space between us. You saved me a serious misstep today, Emily, he said, his voice low. I saw his words as an attack on my success. You saw them as a challenge to my cultural legitimacy. That difference could have cost me the Long Beach revenue. In that moment, the lines between boss and employee, between creditor and debtor, blurred completely. There was only shared intensity, the adrenaline rush of having faced down a threat together. It was just translation, I said, my voice thin. No. He reached out and brushed a stray piece of hair from my cheek. His touch was featherlight, completely unexpected. It was loyalty. An understanding. My heart hammered so hard I thought he must hear it. This man who terrified me, whose life was built on brutality, was also the most focused, competent, and surprisingly eloquent person I had ever met. He carried a crushing weight, and beneath the armor, I saw the lonely man who mourned his sister and felt trapped by his duty. He didn't just see me as an asset. He saw my intelligence, my competence, and my loyalty to my family. He pulled his hand away, and the moment shattered. The debt remains, he said, the change in his voice immediate, a reminder of the barrier between us. But consider this a down payment on your performance. The next day, Rika's second-in-command, a man named Shinji, showed up at the summit. Shinji was Rika's most trusted lieutenant, a man whose loyalty was supposedly absolute, forged in years of shared battles. He was quiet, respectful, and terrifyingly efficient. He was also the first supporting character who looked at me with open, unmasked hostility. Shinji knew the old Riku, the man who was cold, precise, and completely focused on his empire. He saw me, the new American female shadow, as a complication, a distraction. When Riku introduced me to Shinji, I extended my hand. Shinji bowed stiffly, refusing the handshake, his eyes sharp and assessing. Tanaka-sama is well served, Shinji said in formal Japanese, the tone suggesting the exact opposite. I trust you understand the gravity of your position, Carter-san. I understand that my loyalty is to Mr. Tanaka and his interests, I replied calmly, using the appropriate honorific for Riku. Shinji's lip curled slightly, but he said nothing more. The dramatic irony was heavy. Riku trusted Shinji completely, seeing him as his most reliable pillar, while Shinji already viewed me as an existential threat to Rika's discipline and, more importantly, to Shinji's own influence. That evening, a minor earthquake hit San Diego. Nothing major, but enough to rattle the windows and knock out the power for a brief, tense moment. Riku and I were having a late dinner in his suite, going over notes for the next day. The lights flickered and died. The city plunged into a brief, unsettling darkness. In the silence, Riku moved instantly, not to defend himself but toward the window. I watched him in the faint glow of the city lights resuming. He was looking for any unusual movement below. The power will be back in a minute, I said, my voice barely a whisper. In my world, Riku replied. The minute the lights go out is the minute a knife finds your throat. He didn't move. He didn't seem scared, just ready. That stillness, that absolute readiness was intoxicating. I realized then that the pressure cooker of his life, the constant threat of violence, the need for perfect control, was the source of his intense attraction. He wasn't just handsome. He was a man living on a wire, and I felt utterly compelled to watch him walk it. I need to get a better handle on the structure of the Tanaka family, I said, pulling my attention back to the work. Who reports to whom? Who owes whom? My father's generation was more about bloodlines. Mine is about competence and debt, Riku explained, finally turning from the window as the emergency lights in the corridor flickered on. You understand debt, Emily. You understand what it means to owe someone everything. I understand what it means to be trapped by it, I corrected him. He walked over to the desk, picking up a heavy, ornate letter opener. He traced the handle with his thumb. I never asked you this, Emily. Why did your father leave? You said he disappeared after your mother died. The question came out of nowhere, stripping away the professional armor I'd built. He couldn't handle the grief, I admitted, my voice dropping. He started drinking. He lost his job. He was drowning. One morning he just left a note saying he couldn't do it anymore, that he was sorry, and that I was a better parent to Danny than he ever was. I rarely talked about this. It was the deepest source of my flaw foundation. A desperate need to compensate for my father's failure, to be the rock that never crumbled, which made me vulnerable to anyone who threatened the one person I needed to protect. Riku looked at me not with judgment but with a strange dark kinship. He chose to run. I chose to fight. We are both running from the same thing, Emily. The loss of control. What did you lose control of? Everything, he said, turning the letter opener over and over in his hand. When Yuki died, I lost my last reason to be anything but what my father wanted me to be. I lost the capacity to hope for a different future. I put on the suit and became the machine. And machines don't lose control. His confession, quiet and raw, was the final hook. He saw my deepest flaw, my need to save, and exposed his own deep-seated trauma, his inability to save his sister. It formed an alliance built not on love, but on shared pain and absolute necessity. You need to commit to this, Riku said, his gaze intense. If we leave this summit without firm agreements, a lot of blood will be spilled. And not just ours. You must be prepared to lie, to manipulate, to do whatever I need you to do to protect the Tanaka family interests. I am committed, I said, meeting his gaze. You saved Danny. I will protect your interests. Good. The tension in the room, which had been sexual and emotional, shifted back to the dangerous focus of their business. That night, before I went to my own room, Riku handed me a thick leather-bound folder. This is the alliance that forms under pressure, he said. It contains every secret arrangement, every debt owed, every piece of blackmail material I have on Kojima and the other leaders. Read it. Memorize it. You are not just translating words tomorrow. You are translating power. I took the folder. The weight of it in my hands felt like the weight of Riku's entire empire. What if someone finds out I have this? Then we both die, Riku said, his voice flat. But I trust you, Emily. Because I own you, and you are loyal to what I protect. I left his suite, the weight of the secrets and the immense risk settling over me. I was officially the keeper of Riku Tanaka's most sensitive information. I was trapped, but I was also invaluable. I had stepped across the threshold and there was no going back. I opened the folder in my hotel room. Inside, the pages were filled with names, dates, financial transactions, and photographs. The ugly truth of organized crime. And then I found it. Hidden in plain sight among the Long Beach debt records, a single critical detail that I should have seen but missed, disguised as unimportant. A small, almost irrelevant payment transfer made a month ago from Riku's personal account to the accounts of the men who run the debt network that Jason Park and consequently Danny had become entangled with. Riku had known about Danny's impending problem before the collectors came calling. The realization hit me hard. He hadn't saved Danny from an accidental threat. He had orchestrated the transfer of the debt to a particularly ruthless collector, only to step in later and claim the debt for himself. He hadn't rescued me out of kindness. He'd manufactured the crisis so I would be forced to accept his protection and his ownership out of necessity. He had created the trap. I felt a cold, devastating clarity. The shame, the fascination, the strange vulnerability he had shown me. It was all a performance. The most dangerous man in Los Angeles wasn't the one who used guns. It was the one who used people's love for their family as leverage. I had just given him my complete, irrevocable commitment based on a lie. The devastating truth was simple. Riku Tanaka didn't save my brother, he bought me. I closed the folder, the papers rustling like dried leaves. My face was wet, but I wasn't crying. I was calculating. The clock was ticking. I had to continue the performance. I had to act committed. Because now the stakes were personal. I was not just fighting for Danny's freedom. I was fighting for my own dignity. And I was now armed with Riku's most guarded secrets. The leather folder felt less like a book of secrets and more like a stone in my gut. Riku hadn't saved me. He'd engineered my captivity. That knowledge that my brother's life had been used as a tool for leverage didn't make me collapse. It made me rigid. It sharpened every sense. The game changed completely after that night in San Diego. The emotional connection I'd felt with Riku, the dangerous kinship built on shared trauma and late-night honesty, was immediately replaced by a cold, surgical focus. I had to maintain the illusion of compliance while simultaneously gathering the evidence that would not only free Danny but destroy the trap Riku had built around me. I now ran two tension threads simultaneously. The first was external, helping Riku navigate the complex and violent world of the West Coast clans. The second was internal, watching him, recording his moves, and analyzing the secrets he trusted me with. Back in Los Angeles, Riku's success, built partly on my cultural insight at the summit, amplified his arrogance. He became even more remote, more absorbed in the machinery of his expanding empire. My role evolved further. I was now managing certain legitimate business fronts, real estate holdings, investment firms, that served as sophisticated washing machines for the clan's funds. In the process, I learned layer one of his deception. Riku wasn't just a mafia boss. He was an economic strategist. He used the legitimate businesses to bleed out the weaker, more traditional clans, including Kojima's. Every property bought with clean money reduced their territory, effectively making his crime look like a shrewd investment. I started keeping a separate journal, encrypted on a burner phone I kept hidden in the bottom of a hollowed-out book, one of my mother's old Japanese poetry collections. I copied financial codes, transaction details, and names. Every lie Riku told me, I wrote down the date and the context. Riku started questioning my reality almost immediately. He noticed my sudden quiet intensity. One night, we were reviewing quarterly reports in his office. I pointed out a discrepancy in the cash flow projections for a new restaurant venture in Seattle. "That's a minor error, Emily," he said, barely looking up from his tablet. "It's not minor. The projected profit margins are based on an outdated supply chain cost. If we use the new vendor, the margin drops by almost half a point." "It's a bad investment," I replied, my tone purely business. He finally looked up, his black eyes scrutinizing my face. "You've become very focused on profit margins recently. You used to be focused on the poetry of things." The implication was clear. He was asking why the emotional, vulnerable Emily had disappeared, replaced by this ice-cold analyst. "I learned quickly that in your world, Riku, the only thing that matters is the bottom line," I said, meeting his gaze. "My personal feelings are irrelevant. I am a business asset." He didn't argue. He just smiled, that tight, almost genuine smile, and said, "Good. It seems you're adapting quickly." But the smile didn't reach his eyes. He was testing me, and my calculated performance of cold competence only affirmed his belief that he had molded me into the perfect tool. Meanwhile, Danny was struggling. He was still safe, thanks to Riku's manufactured protection, but he was noticing the escalating changes in my life. I was always gone. My clothes were expensive. I moved with a new kind of tension, always checking my periphery. You smell like expensive whiskey and something I think is called danger," Danny joked one morning over breakfast, but his eyes were serious. "Is this job dangerous?" I put my hand over his. "It's high stress, Danny. It's the highest level of corporate finance. Lots of high-stakes negotiating. It's fine. I'm fine." I knew my lies were becoming more elaborate. My job was not just to protect Danny from physical harm, but to shield him from the moral filth of Rika's world. The weight of that secrecy was almost crushing. The second layer of deception arrived in the form of a woman. Riku announced one evening that we would be attending a major charity gala. A necessary public relations move for his legitimate businesses. "You will accompany me," Riku told me. "You are my current professional escort. But understand your place. Tonight, I will be seen with my fiancé." My heart lurched. I hadn't even considered that Riku, the man I was dangerously attached to, would have a private life, let alone a long-term commitment. It was a stupid, naive oversight. "Fiancé?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "I wasn't aware." "It's a business arrangement," he dismissed, waving his hand. "A necessary alliance to solidify certain political connections on the East Coast. Her family is influential. We will marry in 6 months." This was the first true evidence of the other person. Aya Nakamura. Aya was breathtaking. She was the perfect match for the public persona Riku cultivated, elegant, graceful, impeccably dressed, and from a lineage that spoke of old-world power. She was the opposite of my worn resilience and weary eyes. She represented everything Riku claimed to hate, the stifling traditional expectations of family. Yet he was embracing her for the sake of his empire. The gala was held in a massive glass-walled museum downtown. I stood slightly behind Riku, maintaining the posture of a valued assistant, but I was burning with a mixture of betrayal and mounting dread. Aya was polite to me, almost condescending. She spoke to Riku in Japanese that was so formal, so stylized, it was a performance in itself. "Riku, darling," Aya cooed, her hand resting delicately on his arm. "Your assistant is very dedicated. Does she ever take a day off?" Riku smiled smoothly. "Emily is invaluable, Aya. She handles the details I find tedious." I looked at Aya and saw her as the personification of Riku's ultimate sacrifice. He was marrying a walking business transaction. But I also saw the third layer of deception. Aya believed the narrative Riku had created for her. She believed he loved her in his own cold, powerful way. She was sacrificing her freedom for the status and protection his name provided. As Riku and Aya drifted away to speak with a local senator, I was cornered by Shinji. He had been lurking near the service entrance all night, watching me. "You're too close, Carter-san," Shinji hissed, his eyes narrowed. "He's distracted. He's taking unnecessary risks. You are the flaw in his armor." "Your concern is misplaced, Shinji," I returned calmly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am the one who ensures he understands what Kojima is truly saying. I am the one who manages his legitimate finances. I make him more powerful, not weaker." "Power without discipline is just noise," Shinji countered. "He talks to you at night. About his sister. About his feelings. That is weakness. The Tanaka family has no need for a foreign woman who confuses duty with emotion." This encounter confirmed two things. Shinji's suspicion of me was a ticking clock on the safety of my position, and Riku had indeed shared genuine moments of vulnerability. Moments Shinji viewed as disastrous. The relationship was deepening, even as it was becoming more tangled with lies and threats. I presented Riku with an apparent resolution that night. Late back in his office, I handed him a detailed spreadsheet showing how a rival organization was encroaching on one of his key distribution networks. "Kojima's organization is financing this expansion," I explained. "It's subtle, but if you don't shut it down now, you'll lose 20% of your Pacific Northwest revenue within 6 months. Riku studied the numbers, his face grim. "They are using a shell company I can't touch legally. But you can touch the people financing it," I said, leaning over the desk, my heart pounding as I took the risk. "You need to show absolute strength. If you eliminate the finance men, the shell collapses and Kojima is left looking weak and exposed at the next summit. You win the war without firing a shot, just by showing superior intelligence. It was a brilliant plan, cold and ruthlessly efficient. It was a plan Riku would execute perfectly, ensuring his success built on my sacrifice. My moral center was crumbling, forced to propose violence to maintain my position. You're right, Riku said, leaning back in his chair, a look of profound respect, or maybe professional admiration in his eyes. This is superior. He then did something completely unexpected. He reached out, not to touch me, but to lift the necklace I was wearing. A simple silver chain with a small sapphire, a gift from him, another layer of the debt. You gave up everything for your brother, Emily, he said, his voice quiet. You gave up your life, your morality, your peace. Aya gives me status, but you give me insight. Do you regret it? The question was a profound trap. If I said yes, I was disloyal and weak. If I said no, I was confirming my moral decay. I looked him in the eye, my gaze steady. I regret that my brother was ever put in danger. I do not regret the choice I made to protect him. He studied me for a long moment, then dropped the necklace. I will handle Kojima's people tonight. You go home and rest. You've earned it. I went home, but I couldn't rest. The plan I'd given him would work. Riku would succeed, and the scope of his power would expand. He would see this success as proof of my inherent value to him, locking the trap even tighter. But that night I did two things. First, I used the burner phone to send an anonymous, untraceable tip to a low-level financial crimes investigator about the shell company's activity in the Pacific Northwest. A slow-burn fuse that wouldn't detonate immediately, but would ensure Rika's victory wasn't clean or untroubled. Second, I went into Danny's room and watched him sleep, his face peaceful, innocent. He was still the point, and the only way to save him was to destroy the powerful, fascinating, and utterly ruthless man who had trapped us both. I was building toward the discovery moment, and it would be Rika's success built on my intelligence that would be his ultimate undoing. The pressure was mounting and soon the walls would burst. Riku's successful execution of the plan I provided, neutralizing Kojima's financing without direct violence, only served to deepen the trap. He was elated, viewing the move as a testament to our professional synergy. My intelligence had secured his business, confirming his calculated risk in leveraging Danny's life. He saw me as the most valuable asset in his organization. I saw him as the target. The first devastating technique was the isolation. Rika started demanding my presence not just at Kagami or meetings, but at his private estate in the Hollywood Hills. It wasn't a punishment. It was an expansion of my duties. I was required to manage his personal calendar, vet the people he spoke to, and translate his calls late into the night. This meant I was rarely home. Danny, sensing the distance and the shift in my priorities, grew quiet and withdrawn. He'd try to call me, but Rika's life demanded total silence and focus. I'd send him texts, "I love you, I'll be home late, eat dinner," but the connection was fraying. The person I was doing all of this for was slipping away from me. One Tuesday night, I was translating a tense financial call in Rika's study, when Danny called me 3 times in a row. I silenced the burner phone. When the call ended, Rika looked at me. "Your brother," he stated, not asked. "He seems anxious." "He's studying for exams," I lied smoothly. "He'll be fine." "You should cut the tether," Riku advised, his voice devoid of judgment, purely transactional. "You cannot be invaluable to me if half of your mind is always somewhere else. Distance is necessary for focus, Emily." "I am focused," I insisted, though my hands were shaking. "Show me." The next day, Riku had one of his security detail drop off a brand new, highly advanced laptop at our small Koreatown apartment, supposedly for Danny's schoolwork. The gift was lavish, expensive. It was also laced with malware that Rika's tech team could use to monitor Danny's communications and location. It was a brilliant, horrifying move. He was consolidating his ownership not just of me, but of the very person I was trying to protect under the guise of generosity. Riku had stripped me of my home support system, and replaced it with a controlled surveillance system. I was completely isolated. The second devastating technique was the unexpected link between characters, specifically between Rika's fiancé, Aya Nakamura, and the debt I owed. Aya was preparing for a traditional Japanese engagement ritual, and I was assigned the duty of coordinating the logistics, which included reviewing the legal documents surrounding the financial exchange between the two families. I was in Rika's office late one afternoon, reviewing a detailed account ledger for one of his property fronts, a company called Sakura Holdings. It was tedious work cross-referencing investments with tax filings. I noticed a specific transaction, a large wire transfer made 6 months ago, flagged internally as a personal expenditure. 6 months ago was before Riku and I met, before the incident at the restaurant, and long before Danny's debt came into play. Curiosity made me trace the account number. It belonged to an offshore account. It took me 4 hours of careful work, using the advanced analytical software Riku had given me for his legitimate business, to decrypt the payee. The recipient wasn't Kojima or a business associate, or even a shell company. The recipient was Aya Nakamura's family foundation. I pulled up the associated legal documents Riku had asked me to file for the engagement ceremony. The documents didn't just formalize the union. They outlined a massive multi-million-dollar exchange. The money Riku had wired was not a gift or dowry. It was a loan. An interest-free undocumented loan made to save Aya's family from a looming financial disaster involving a failed investment years prior. The truth exploded in my mind. Riku was not marrying Aya for political status alone. He was marrying her because her powerful family was secretly bankrupt, and he owned them completely through an immense hidden debt. He was securing the alliance through the same mechanism he secured me, financial bondage. Aya, the perfect traditional fiancée, was just as trapped as I was, forced into the marriage to save her lineage, completely oblivious that Riku was her creditor, not just her suitor. This revelation, the shattering of the relationship I thought was a threat to me, was the midpoint devastation. Aya was not the other person. She was another asset, a highly valuable one, secured by Rika's fourth layer of deception. I now understood Rika's true, deep-seated motivation. His entire empire, both legitimate and criminal, was built not on loyalty, but on total financial control of every person in his orbit. He had learned from his sister Yuki's death that love and trust were weaknesses. Debt and obedience were the only safe currencies. The realization stripped me of my last shreds of moral support. I had despised Aya as my competition, as the symbol of the life I couldn't have with Riku. Now I saw her as a fellow victim, but one I couldn't save because any attempt to expose Riku to Aya would expose me too. I was standing alone in the center of Rika's controlled universe, watching the threads of deception tighten around everyone. The discovery was followed immediately by the consequence. I was so shaken by the revelation about Aya that I made a critical error. I forgot to clear the search history on the analytical software. A tiny careless oversight. I closed down the system and went to the staff break room to try and regain my composure. When I returned 10 minutes later, Riku was standing over the desk, the software still open to the property front ledger. He was looking at the section detailing the offshore transfer to the Nakamura Foundation. He looked up at me, his face utterly blank. The composure was so absolute it was terrifying. "Did you find what you were looking for, Emily?" he asked, his voice smooth and cold. "I was cross-referencing tax documents with investment history, Riku," I said, my heart hammering, trying to sound professional. "I'm checking the long-term capital gains for the quarter." "No," he countered, pushing the keyboard toward me so I could see the screen. The log showed my precise search query from an hour ago. Nakamura Family Foundation debt. You were investigating my personal transactions. The dramatic irony was gone. The audience knowledge advantage had vanished. I was caught. I could have lied, but something snapped. The stress, the isolation, the crushing weight of his control. It all fueled a sudden reckless defiance. "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "I was investigating how you control your closest allies. I was seeing if your fiancé is as trapped as I am." Rika's expression darkened. The quiet anger was worse than any shout. You presume too much, Emily. You forget your place. My place is the one you created for me, I retorted, the words rushing out. A hostage in all but name. I owe you $15,000. You owe his family millions. We are both your leverage. The only difference is I know it and she doesn't. He took a step toward me, closing the distance, and the air crackled with danger. You are valuable because you are controlled. You are valuable because you obey. You are not paid to understand my methods, only to execute my instructions. He was furious, but he wasn't shaking. He was a predator who had found a flaw in his cage. I need to know if I can still trust you, he said. You never trusted me, Riku. You bought me. There is a difference. And if I decide you are too much of a liability, too curious, too human to remain close to me, then you lose your most valuable asset, I whispered. The only person who can keep you from being ambushed by Kojima or outmaneuvered by the Docs Alliance. The only one who speaks the language of power that you truly need. He stood there for a long moment, the conflict raging in his eyes. He couldn't kill me. Not yet. He still needed me. But he couldn't let my defiance go unpunished. Riku took out his personal phone and made a call, speaking rapid, clipped Japanese. I didn't need to translate the tone to understand. It was an order, cold and absolute. He hung up and looked at me, his eyes dead black. The debt remains, Emily. $15,000, plus accrued interest for the last month. Effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties at the Kagami headquarters. You will return to your old apartment. Shinji will be collecting your personal effects from this office. You will not contact me or attempt to approach me, or anyone associated with the Nakamura family. This was worse than being fired. This was being cast out, stripped of the status that provided protection, and sent back to the unstable environment where danger lurked. And Danny? I asked, my voice barely holding together. Your brother is safe. For now. He didn't promise permanence. But the debt comes due. $15,000 payable in full in 10 days. If you fail, the original collectors, Kobayashi's men, will be notified that the debt is once again available for collection. The devastation was complete. I was back where I started, only now I was isolated. My brother's life was on a 10-day timer, and I was armed with secrets that made me a dangerous enemy. Riku had shattered the deepest relationship, the fragile, dangerous dependency we shared, and sentenced me to desperation. He had successfully stripped me of all support and sent me spiraling into the darkest descent. The elevator ride down from Kagami was the most expensive trip I'd ever taken. I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing the gilded cage that had protected me. The world outside, the vibrant, indifferent neon chaos of Los Angeles, felt like a threat again. Riku had not just fired me. He had strategically stripped me of all security and leverage, enforcing his ultimate control. He had tossed me back into the street, knowing I was armed with secrets, but utterly disarmed by a 10-day ticking clock on Danny's life. The Koreatown apartment felt small, dusty, and infinitely unsafe. For the last 2 months, I had been accustomed to the high security of Rika's office, the shielded windows, the armed guards. Now, every sound from the hallway, every siren on the street, sent a spike of panic through me. Shinji arrived that evening, not to return my personal effects, but to serve Rika's final psychological blow. He brought 2 things: the expensive navy dress I'd worn to the summit, now neatly folded, and a large official envelope. Mr. Tanaka sent this, Carter-san, Shinji said, his face cold and triumphant. He hated me for distracting Riku, and now he was enjoying my exile. The dress is yours. The rest of your clothes and personal items have been moved out of the apartment. They are no longer relevant to your arrangement. What is this? I asked, holding the heavy envelope. It is the final accounting. Shinji leaned in, his voice a low, vicious hiss. Mr. Tanaka wants you to understand the true cost of your curiosity. Shinji left, leaving me standing in the center of the apartment, the smell of cheap takeout fighting the scent of Rika's expensive cologne clinging to the dress. I ripped open the envelope, It wasn't just a bill for $15,000. It was a formal legalistic document detailing the original loan, the accrued interest, the penalty fees for breach of trust, and most brutally, a detailed itemized list of every expense Riku had covered since I started working for him. The new dresses, the transportation, the single piece of sapphire jewelry, all of it was listed, with the chilling calculation that these were advances against future loyalty. My debt hadn't just remained. It had ballooned to over $35,000. I was in complete financial devastation. I had 10 days to pay a sum that was more than my previous annual salary combined, or Kobayashi's men would come for Danny. There was no way to get that money. My bank account was nearly empty. I had no job, no references, and no support system I dared contact, knowing Riku could monitor them. Riku's message delivered through the document was clear. It was a gift, but you forfeited the right to keep it when you broke my trust. He justified his actions with terrifying logic. He had provided security and status, and in return, he expected absolute control. When I questioned that control, I became a liability, and liabilities must be neutralized. The financial document was the physical manifestation of my moral anguish. He had forced me to rely on him, and then he used that dependency as the weapon. I felt a complete, crushing sense of isolation. I called Danny's phone. No answer. I tried his usual grocery store job. They hadn't seen him. I went to his room, and that was the true rock bottom. His small desk was neat, his textbooks stacked, but his new expensive laptop, the one Riku gave him, was open. I checked the communication logs. Danny hadn't run away. He was just avoiding me. He'd been messaging his friend Jason Park, the one who started this mess. Danny, she's never home. She smells like money I don't trust. I think she's in trouble. Jason, dude, she's trying to save you. Be grateful. Danny. Grateful for what? Being a burden? She's losing herself. I wish she'd just quit. The dialogue was a gut punch. My sacrifice, the very reason I had endured Riku's torment, was hurting the person I was trying to protect. He didn't see me as a hero. He saw me as a stranger who was sacrificing her soul for him. I was losing the most precious thing, my bond with my brother. I called my old coffee shop manager, begging for my job back. He sounded hesitant. Emily, I heard you were working for that high-profile Japanese firm. I'm sorry you've been gone too long. I can't take you back. It's too unstable. Riku had ensured that even my old humble life was inaccessible. I was completely alone. I was sitting on my pull-out couch, the sapphire necklace still around my neck, the weight of $35,000 on my shoulders, realizing I had gone from a struggling but stable guardian to a debt slave with 10 days to live before the consequences of a Mafia war destroyed my family. The inner struggle was crippling. I had Riku's secrets, the knowledge that Aya was his leverage, the proof that he manufactured Danny's debt, the full accounting of his legitimate fronts. I had enough information to sink him or at least badly wound his empire. But every option I considered led to disaster. 1. Go to the police. I had no proof they would accept. I was a discredited former employee of a powerful businessman, and I would have to confess my complicity in running his money and my relationship with the Yakuza. Riku would silence me or worse, use the legal system to take Danny away from the now unstable, financially devastated former guardian. 2. Go to Aya. She wouldn't believe me. She was too entrenched in her family's tradition and the promise of status. I would simply be seen as the jealous, discarded employee, and she would run straight to Riku. 3. Run. We could disappear, but Riku's network was vast. We would spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, and the debt would still be there, waiting to be enforced. I stared at the leather folder containing Riku's secrets, the secrets I'd nearly died trying to uncover. It felt less like a weapon and more like a tombstone. In the midst of my despair, I remembered Riku's words that night at the summit. You lose the only thing in this world that still makes you human. He was right. If I panicked, if I ran, if I became nothing more than a victim, I would lose my humanity, my strength, the very reason my mother had taught me to demand respect. I spent 3 days in that apartment barely eating, the desperation a heavy blanket. The walls felt like they were closing in. The darkness was absolute. I was stripped bare. Financially ruined, isolated from my brother, and hunted by the most ruthless man in the city. This was the complete devastation. I had nothing left to lose. And that realization, that absolute zero of loss, was the point where the transformation had to begin. Because when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous thing in the world. A person fighting for everything. I put on the navy dress Riku had bought me, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. It was a disguise. It was the only thing I owned that still spoke of the world I needed to break. I took the burner phone and the leather folder. The clock showed 7 days remaining. The time for despair was over. The time for fighting back had begun. The dark descent ended not with a bang, but with a simple refusal. I refused to let Rika's narrative define me. I was not property, I was not a liability, and I would not let the ticking clock claim my brother. The time for hiding in shame or accepting the role of the victim was over. The impossible choice wasn't about if I would fight, but how. I couldn't outrun Riku. I couldn't outgun him. The only way to beat the master strategist was to fight him on his own terms. Leveraging debt, information, and leverage. I took the burner phone and the leather folder filled with Rika's secrets and left the apartment. The navy dress was my armor. It was the only thing that gave me the illusion of status, a currency I desperately needed to re-enter Rika's world without being immediately crushed. My hidden strength, the core skill Riku had relied on, wasn't just my Japanese fluency. It was my analytical ability to connect seemingly disparate data points, the skill my mother had cultivated in me, the one that exposed the debt structures in the first place. I went to a small, independent coffee shop miles away from any of Rika's known territories. I wasn't looking for a white knight or a new lover. I was looking for a tool. I used the burner phone to make an untraceable call to the financial crimes investigator I had anonymously tipped off in. The one investigating the shell company Riku used to neutralize Kojima. The investigator, a sharp, weary woman named Harper, agreed to a discreet meeting. We met at a public library downtown. Harper looked at me, a woman in a designer dress carrying a cheap, disposable phone, with immediate suspicion. My office received a vague tip about Sakura Holdings in Seattle a few weeks ago, Harper said, her voice flat. It went nowhere. It was too broad. It went nowhere because you were looking at the wrong shell, I countered, sliding a single folded piece of paper across the table. It was a copied page from the ledger in Rika's folder, showing the initial transfer of funds to Sakura Holdings, and then immediately redirecting that money to a legitimate, but highly complex, offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. Riku Tanaka's legitimate businesses are perfectly clean, I explained, keeping my voice low. The money is never dirty. It's the source of the debt that funds it that's illegal. You need to follow the leverage, not the cash flow. Harper looked at the document, then back at me. Who are you? I am the person who knows where Mr. Tanaka hides his weaknesses. He builds his empire on financial control. He owns politicians, business leaders, and even his own fiancée through debt. If you want to take him down, you can't hit his business. You have to hit his source of leverage. I didn't ask for protection. I didn't ask for asylum. I gave her information she couldn't ignore. Information that confirmed her suspicion that Riku was untouchable. The choice I faced was stark and brutal. Option 1, remain the victim. Find the money, pay the debt, and secure Danny's safety, thereby confirming Riku's control and forcing myself to live a small, fearful life under his permanent surveillance. Option 2, become the victor. Use Riku's own secrets to destroy his leverage system, freeing Danny permanently, but putting myself in direct, open conflict with a mafia boss who would stop at nothing to eliminate me. My despair had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard determination. I chose option B. I need 2 things from you, Investigator Harper, I said. I need you to confirm the identity of the person who initiated that wire transfer into Sakura Holdings. You have the legal access to do that. I don't. Harper narrowed her eyes. Why would I do that? Because if you expose the one person Rika trusts absolutely, You expose the true depth of his deceit. And that person is the only way I can get my leverage back. My brother's freedom depends on it. Harper stared at me for a full minute, sensing the absolute desperation and the professional quality of the intelligence I was offering. I can't promise anything, she said, pocketing the folded paper. But if this transfer leads where I think it does, it's a multi-agency operation. It blows his whole system wide open. The second piece of information I needed to secure my freedom was purely personal. I had to address the source of my enslavement. I needed Riku to acknowledge the truth, that he created Danny's debt. I went back to the only person I could trust for basic uncorrupted information, Danny. I found him at his high school library studying. When he saw me, he flinched. The distance between us was a physical barrier. What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice strained. "You're supposed to be busy." "I am busy," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I'm busy saving our lives." I didn't lie to him anymore. I couldn't. I lost my job. Riku Tanaka, the owner of the restaurant, is the head of a massive criminal organization. He manufactured your friend Jason's debt and transferred it to a collector to force me to work for him. The debt is now $35,000, and he gave me 7 days to pay, or he's sending the collectors after you. I watched him process the words. His face went white. He didn't question the truth. He only questioned the consequences. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you tell me this now?" "Because I need your help, Danny," I confessed, the shame sharp and metallic. "I need you to be smarter than I was. I need you to trust me one last time." I didn't ask him to run or to hide. I gave him a task that used his greatest skill, his brilliance with technology and logic. "Rika gave you that new laptop, right? It's loaded with surveillance software. It's how he keeps track of you. But you're better than his tech team. I need you to break the encryption on that surveillance software, figure out what he's looking for, and copy the entire contents of his hard drive undetected into this." I handed him a small military-grade flash drive I'd bought with my last cash. "You want me to hack a Mafia boss?" Danny asked, his eyes wide. "I want you to use your skills to free us both. He sees you as collateral, Danny. You need to show him you're a weapon. This is the only way out. This is the only chance we have to stop running." The moral anguish of dragging my innocent brother into this was immense, but it was the only viable path to freedom. Riku had taught me that leverage and information were the only true defenses. Danny looked from the flash drive to my face, seeing the exhaustion, the fear, and the raw, unyielding love I felt for him. "I need proof, Em," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Proof that he used Jason's debt to buy you." I pulled out the burner phone and showed him the copied ledger page from the San Diego folder, the page that showed Rika's personal payment to the Collectors Front organization, made 3 weeks before the debt was supposedly transferred to Kobayashi. Danny studied the numbers, the logic of the deception clicking into place. The final piece of evidence I needed to change my life. "Okay," Danny said, closing his textbook. "He wants to play chess? We'll play chess. He should know better than to give a tech genius surveillance software." I felt the hope rise, emerging from the blackness of my despair. I wasn't alone. I hadn't lost my brother. We were in this together. The transformation was complete. I was no longer an asset. I was the strategist, and my brother was my essential, skilled ally. We were going to rewrite Rika's narrative. The confrontation wasn't going to be a secret meeting in a dimly lit office. Riku had built his empire on public perception and controlled narratives. To destroy him, I had to destroy his stage. The perfect venue was the Nakamura engagement party. Riku and Aya were hosting a massive, high-profile event at a historic private club overlooking the Pacific. It was the formal public announcement of their union, attended by powerful figures from the city's political, financial, and underworld circles. It was Rika's ultimate show of legitimacy and control, the moment he would cement his debt-based alliance with the old money Nakamura family. I spent the remaining 3 days working with Danny, while he monitored Rika's movements and ensured the integrity of the data he'd siphoned from the encrypted laptop. a goldmine of evidence. I coordinated the external pressure. My transformation was absolute. I walked into the party wearing the navy designer dress Riku had bought, but this time it was my choice, not his uniform. I arrived alone, composed, my posture radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear. The room was packed. Riku stood beside Aya near the center of the main ballroom, accepting congratulations. He was the picture of power. Dangerous, handsome, and untouchable. Aya was stunning, but I saw the forced smile, the stiffness in her shoulders, the tension of a bride marrying her family's creditor. When Riku saw me, his mask flickered just for an instant. Surprise followed by a cold, immediate anger. He broke away from his conversation and walked toward me, his movements deliberate, threatening. "You have 6 days left, Emily," he said, his voice dangerously low, speaking in perfect English. "If you are here to beg, you have wasted your time." "I'm not here to beg, Riku," I replied, my voice calm, projecting just enough for the surrounding guests to pause their chatter. "I'm here to collect." "You have nothing to collect. You owe me $35,000. "No," I countered. "You owe me my brother's life, and I am here to reclaim it." Shinji, sensing the danger, moved quickly to intercept, but I held Riku's gaze, my hands remaining still at my sides. "I'd advise against touching me, Shinji," I said, addressing Riku's lieutenant directly in fluent Japanese. "Unless you want to be implicated in the fraud that is about to dismantle your Oyabun's entire operation." Shinji froze, shock flashing across his face. The transformation from humble assistant to tactical threat was complete. Before Riku could regain control, a small commotion started at the far end of the ballroom. Investigator Harper and 2 uniformed police officers walked purposefully into the venue, their eyes scanning the crowd. They didn't approach Riku immediately, but their presence was the first crack in his foundation. I took the opening. I pulled out the burner phone and accessed the specific folder Danny had prepared. I had synchronized it to the club's private network moments before Riku saw me, a move only Danny's brilliance could have pulled off. I looked at Riku, addressing him publicly in English, but using the specific terminology that only his inner circle would understand. "You believe you control everyone through debt, Riku. You believe loyalty is a trap. But tonight, I proved that information is the only true currency." I held up the phone. "This device contains a full, unencrypted copy of your personal hard drive from your secured laptop. Everything. Financial accounts, communications with political figures, and the full internal accounting of the Sakura Holdings and Kyoto Trust shell companies." The guests around us started buzzing. Riku's face remained impassive, but his eyes were blazing with disbelief. "You're making empty threats, Emily. Those files are encrypted with military-grade security. They are locked." "They were until your leverage, my brother, the 17-year-old high school student, used the back door you installed to monitor him against you." I walked directly to Aya, who was watching in horrified silence. "Aya-san," I said gently, switching to formal Japanese, ensuring every guest who understood the language heard the betrayal. "You believe you are marrying a man of status and wealth. You believe your family is being saved. But he is not your husband. He is your creditor." I held up the phone again, displaying the key piece of evidence. The legal document detailing the $45 million interest-free loan to the Nakamura Family Foundation, secured against the marriage contract. "Here is the truth. You are not a bride, Aya. You are collateral. Your family is bankrupt and Riku Tanaka owns your legacy through debt, just as he owned my brother's life through debt." Aya looked at the screen, then at Riku. The realization of the deeper betrayal, the realization that her shame was now public, was instantaneous and devastating. "Riku," she whispered, her voice breaking. Riku took a sudden aggressive step toward me. "This is slander. She is a disgraced employee." But his denial was too late. The second truth bomb was ready. Investigator Harper, who had subtly maneuvered toward the cluster of Riku's political allies, spoke up, holding up a small, sealed legal document. "Mr. Tanaka," Harper's voice cut through the noise, official and non-negotiable. I am placing a freeze order on all assets linked to the Kyoto Trust and Sakura Holdings, based on evidence of systemic laundering and debt manipulation. The lead on this information, the one who saw through your operation, is Miss Emily Carter. Riku's legitimate empire, the foundation of his entire modern power structure, had just been legally dismantled. I turned back to Riku, delivering the final crushing blow, the evidence of his personal manufactured cruelty. You had 2 meetings with Kobayashi's associates 3 weeks before Danny's supposed debt was discovered, Riku, I stated, my voice echoing with vindication. Danny didn't owe money. You created the debt and then pretended to save him to force my obedience. You don't build empires on loyalty, Riku. You build them on fear. And fear always betrays you. The witnesses to the truth were everywhere. Aya, realizing her family was saved only to be enslaved. Shinji, seeing his Oyabun exposed as a calculating cheat, losing his carefully cultivated legitimacy, and the financial and political elite, watching their powerful ally crumble. Riku's composure finally shattered. He wasn't yelling. He was defeated. His eyes held the pure, venomous rage of a man who realized he had given the one person he needed the exact tools necessary to destroy him. You will regret this, Emily, Riku hissed, abandoning all formality. You will never be safe. Before he could take another step, Investigator Harper signaled the uniformed officers. Riku Tanaka, Harper announced clearly. You are under arrest for money laundering and conspiracy to defraud. As the officers moved in, Riku didn't fight. He stood there, allowing the cold metal of the handcuffs to click into place, his eyes locked on mine. In that moment of public humiliation, I saw not the dangerous Mafia boss, but the lonely man who lost himself to duty and control. But the fear was gone. He had lost. I had destroyed his pride, exposed his empire, and most importantly, secured my brother's freedom. The cathartic release in the room was palpable. Justice had arrived, delivered by the person Riku had deemed disposable. I left the Nakamura engagement party, not through the front doors, but through a side exit, accompanied by Investigator Harper, carrying the flash drive that held Riku's future. The city lights outside seemed brighter, the air cleaner. I walked out of his world transformed and vindicated, leaving the ruins of his empire behind me. The shockwaves from the Nakamura engagement party did not subside quickly. Riku Tanaka was detained, and the massive financial investigation triggered by Investigator Harper and Danny's evidence went into overdrive. The world Riku had so meticulously built on layers of clean money and dirty debt began to collapse with astonishing speed. Riku faced an immediate reckoning. The evidence gathered from his hard drive, combined with my testimony and the sudden freezing of all assets linked to the Kyoto Trust and Sakura Holdings, proved systemic money laundering and tax fraud. The organized crime charges were layered on top of the financial felonies. The legal proceedings were swift, a necessary outcome of Riku having so thoroughly involved high-profile politicians and legitimate business leaders. They all scrambled to distance themselves, ensuring Riku became the sacrificial lamb. Shinji, Riku's loyal lieutenant, was also indicted. His absolute devotion to Riku ultimately meant his complete immersion in the illegal operations. He had not only facilitated the legitimate fronts but had been the key enforcer, and the evidence proved his deep complicity. Riku's personal reputation, which relied entirely on the perception of untouchable precision, was destroyed. He went from being the feared Oyabun to a humiliated, isolated figure awaiting trial. Aya Nakamura, devastated but vindicated, publicly severed all ties, ensuring her family foundation was cleared of association, though the deep debt Riku had manufactured still had to be navigated. She had lost her reputation, but she regained her freedom from the golden cage. The debt against Danny, the $35,000 Riku had fabricated and weaponized, was formally dismissed. The transaction records provided by Danny proved Riku had deliberately manipulated the situation, rendering the debt illegal and void. Danny was safe permanently. The primary victory was internal growth. I was no longer the exhausted waitress driven by fear and desperation. I was the resourceful strategist who had destroyed a crime boss using his own methods. The shame of being manipulated had been replaced by the quiet confidence of having fought back and won. 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable. I was utilizing the legitimate analytical skills I honed under Riku, not for money laundering but for good. Investigator Harper, impressed by my ability to decode Riku's debt structures, sponsored my application for a role as a financial analyst for a new, specialized regulatory compliance firm. The work was intense and complicated, but it was honest, and my past made me uniquely effective at identifying predatory financial practices. Danny flourished. Free from the weight of the debt and my constant distraction, he focused entirely on his academics. He was accepted into USC with a full scholarship, achieving the future I had almost sacrificed everything to secure. Our relationship was restored, built now on a foundation of brutal honesty and shared survival. He was no longer a burden. He was my partner in getting free. I sold the Koreatown apartment, which held too many memories of fear and exhaustion, and moved to a smaller, quieter place near the ocean. The financial security was stable, earned, and no longer contingent on anyone else's leverage. The navy dress, the symbol of Rika's ownership, was the last thing I packed. I didn't burn it or discard it. I folded it neatly and placed it in a box, a reminder of the low point and the strength it took to transform. I sit here now 3 years after that chaotic night, and I realize the debt Riku created was ironically the catalyst for my freedom. If he hadn't forced me to become a weapon, I would have remained the fearful, overworked waitress, always waiting for the next disaster. He taught me the language of power, and I used it to write my own ending. My mother used to talk about mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. Rika thought he was permanent, built on iron and control. But he was just as temporary as everyone else. The difference was I learned to embrace the temporary, to adapt to the shifting terrain. I am financially secure, my family is happy and healthy, and I use my skills to expose the very systems that once tried to crush me. I have peace with the past because the journey transformed me from a victim into a victor. I am excited for the future, a future where my choices are my own, not dictated by debt or fear. I hope this story resonated with you, and I hope it made you feel completely at home here with us. This is the kind of raw, emotional reality we dive into every week, exposing the lies and celebrating the strength it takes to fight back. If you loved Emily's transformation and the moment she brought Riku to his knees, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into betrayal and triumph. Did you spot the clues leading to the Nakamura family debt? What was the moment you realized Riku had manufactured the crisis? Drop your theories and comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the end, the only person who can truly control your life is you.